in the sun-baked lands of the Wild West, where justice often wore a dusty mask, Marshal Jeb Harrow held sway over the small town of Redemption. But his redemption was a twisted version, lined with greed and cruelty. Jeb wasn't interested in upholding the law, not really. He saw it as a tool, a way to line his pockets and control the vulnerable. Among those Jeb preyed upon was a hard-working homesteader and his daughter, Sarah. They lived a simple life, scratching a living from the unforgiving soil. Sarah, with her fiery spirit and determination, was the apple of her father's eye. But Jeb saw something else in her, a commodity. He hatched a plan, a wicked scheme to falsely accuse Sarah of a crime she didn't commit, theft, perhaps, or disturbing the peace. The charges didn't matter. The goal was to get her into his custody. Once he had her, Jeb intended to sell her to a wealthy rancher down south, a man known for his unconventional workforce. Sarah would be forced into servitude, her spirit broken under the weight of endless labor and mistreatment. Jeb smiled, a cruel glint in his eyes, as he imagined the profit he would make. He gathered his deputies, men as corrupt as he was, and prepared to execute his plan. He knew the homesteader wouldn't be able to put up much of a fight. He was just one man, and Jeb held all the cards, or so he thought. He underestimated the fierce love of a father and the unpredictable nature of the West. And he certainly didn't anticipate the intervention of a certain outlaw named Clay Maddox. The day Jeb Harrow put his plan into action dawned hot and dusty, like any other in Redemption. But for Sarah and her father, it would be a day that changed everything. Jeb and his deputies rode up to their small homestead, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated everything in a fine layer of red. Sarah was tending to the chickens when she saw them. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew Jeb Harrow. Everyone in town knew him, and no one trusted him. Her father came out of the house, his brow furrowed with concern. "Marshal," he said, his voice wary. "What brings you out this way?" Jeb dismounted, his face grim. "I have a warrant for your daughter's arrest," he announced, his voice ringing with false authority. "She's accused of stealing from Mr. Abernathy's general store." Sarah gasped. "That's a lie," she cried. "I haven't stolen anything." Her father stepped forward, his hands clenched. "This is a mistake, Marshal. My daughter would never do such a thing." Jeb ignored him. He signaled to his deputies, who moved forward and grabbed Sarah. She struggled, her eyes wide with fear. "Father," she screamed. Her father tried to intervene, but Jeb shoved him back. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he warned. "Interfering with an officer of the law is a serious offense." Sarah was dragged away, kicking and screaming, as her father watched helplessly. He knew he couldn't fight them all. He could only watch as his daughter was taken away, his heart filled with despair and a burning desire for revenge. He knew Jeb was up to something far more sinister than a simple theft. He just didn't know what it was yet. But he would find out, and he would do everything in his power to save his daughter. As Sarah was hauled towards the town jail, despair threatened to engulf her. The rough hands of the deputies bruised her arms, and the dust choked her throat. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the already harsh landscape. She knew Jeb Harrow wouldn't let her go easily. This wasn't about stealing. It was something much worse. Despite her fear, a spark of defiance flickered within her. She wouldn't let Jeb break her. She would fight, even if it was the last thing she did. She thought of her father, his face etched with worry, and that image fueled her resolve. She had to be strong for him. The jail cell was cold and damp, the air thick with the stench of stale sweat and hopelessness. Sarah huddled in a corner, trying to make sense of what was happening. She remembered her mother's words, spoken long ago. A strong woman can face any storm. Sarah clung to those words like a lifeline. She refused to succumb to despair. She examined the cell, searching for any weakness, any possible escape route. The window was small and barred, the door made of thick iron. But Sarah wouldn't give up. She would use her wits, her courage, and her unwavering spirit to find a way out. Meanwhile, far from Redemption, a figure known only as Clay Maddox was making his way through the rugged terrain. He was a man of few words, his past shrouded in mystery. Some called him an outlaw, a ruthless gunslinger. Others whispered that he was a protector of the innocent, a force for justice in a lawless land. Whatever the truth, Clay Maddox was a legend, and his name struck fear into the hearts of the wicked. And Clay was about to hear of Jeb Harrow's cruel deed. Clay Maddox wasn't born an outlaw. He was forged in the fires of injustice. Years ago, he had a family, a life, a future. But a corrupt land baron, backed by equally corrupt lawmen, stole it all away. They took his land, his wife, and left him for dead. He survived, fueled by a burning desire for revenge. He became an outlaw, not for the thrill of it, but because it was the only way to fight back against the powerful and corrupt. He roamed the West, righting wrongs where he could, a shadow in the desert, a whisper in the wind. He rarely stayed in one place for long, always moving, always watching. He trusted no one, except perhaps his loyal horse, a black stallion named Midnight. It was in a dusty saloon, miles from redemption, that Clay first heard whispers of Jeb Harrow's latest scheme. A grizzled old prospector, nursing a whiskey, spoke of a homesteader's daughter arrested on false charges, likely to disappear into the clutches of some wealthy sadist. Clay listened intently, his eyes narrowed. He knew the type. Men like Jeb Harrow were a cancer on the land, preying on the weak and vulnerable. The prospector didn't know Clay was listening, didn't know the weight of the past Clay carried on his shoulders. The story resonated with him. It reminded him of his own loss, his own helplessness. He couldn't stand by and let another innocent person suffer. He finished his drink, a grim determination hardening his features. He knew what he had to do. Redemption was about to get a visitor, and Jeb Harrow was about to face the consequences of his actions. Clay saddled Midnight, and without a word, rode off into the setting sun, heading straight for trouble. Clay knew Jeb wouldn't keep Sarah in the redemption jail for long. He'd want to move her quickly, before anyone started asking too many questions. Clay figured Harrow would transport her south along the old stagecoach trail, a treacherous path winding through canyons and scrubland. He rode hard, pushing Midnight to his limits. He reached the stagecoach trail a day ahead of Harrow, giving him time to prepare. He chose his ambush point carefully, a narrow passage between two towering rock formations, with a trail curved sharply. It was the perfect place to spring a surprise. Clay spent the day scouting the area, ensuring there were no hidden dangers or unexpected travelers. He gathered rocks and branches, creating a makeshift barricade to slow Harrow's progress. He positioned himself behind a large boulder, his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the horizon. He waited patiently, the sun beating down on his back. He knew Harrow would come, and he would be ready. He wasn't just rescuing a woman. He was settling a score, fighting against the corruption that had plagued his life for so long. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon, Clay heard the distant sound of horses' hooves. He tensed, his grip tightening on his rifle. He saw them then, Jeb Harrow and his deputies, escorting a wagon. Sarah was inside, bound and gagged. Clay took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. It was time. He was about to unleash hell. He checked his rifle one last time, his eyes fixed on the approaching wagon. The ambush was set. The rescue was about to begin. As the wagon drew closer, Clay unleashed his fury. He fired a shot, the bullet whizzing past Harrow's head, a warning and a declaration of war. The sound echoed through the canyon, shattering the evening calm. Harrow and his deputies scrambled for cover, their horses rearing in panic. The wagon lurched to a halt, throwing Sarah against the side. Clay didn't give them a chance to regroup. He fired again, taking down two deputies with precise shots. He emerged from behind the boulder, a whirlwind of motion and gunfire. He moved with a speed and agility that defied his age, his rifle a deadly extension of his arm. He took cover behind the barricade he'd built, using it to his advantage. Harrow, realizing he was outmatched, ordered his remaining deputies to focus on Clay while he tried to escape with Sarah. But Clay was too quick. He disabled the horses pulling the wagon, trapping Harrow. A fierce gunfight ensued, bullets flying in all directions. Clay dodged and weaved, his movements unpredictable. He took down another deputy, leaving only Harrow standing. Harrow, his face contorted with rage and fear, drew his pistol. "You can't win, Maddox," he yelled. "I'll kill her before I let you take her." Clay ignored him. He aimed his rifle, his eyes cold and unwavering. He fired. The bullet struck Harrow in the arm, disarming him. Harrow crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. Clay approached the wagon cautiously. He cut Sarah free, removing the gag from her mouth. She stared at him, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. He was a stranger, an outlaw, but he was also her savior. He offered her a hand. "It's over," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "You're safe now." He hoisted her onto Midnight, then mounted behind her, and they rode off, leaving Jeb Harrow and his defeated deputies in the dust. The rescue was complete, but their journey was just beginning. Riding behind Clay on Midnight, Sarah was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief that she was no longer in Harrow's clutches warred with terror at being in the hands of a notorious outlaw. She'd heard the stories about Clay Maddox, ruthless, unpredictable, a killer. Was she truly safer now than she had been before? She clung to him tightly, not knowing what else to do. Every muscle in her body was tense, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. She studied the back of his head, trying to decipher his intentions. Was he planning to ransom her? Use her as leverage against someone? Or was he simply a madman, rescuing her for his own twisted amusement? As they rode, she noticed the way he handled Midnight, with a gentle confidence that belied his reputation. She saw the determination in his eyes, the grim set of his jaw. He seemed focused, driven by something more than just a desire for chaos. They rode for hours, stopping only to water the horse and rest briefly. Clay didn't speak, offering no explanation for his actions. The silence was deafening, amplifying Sarah's fears. She finally found the courage to speak, her voice trembling. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you rescue me?" Clay didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "Harrow's a corrupt man," he said. "He was going to sell you into slavery. I couldn't let that happen." His words offered a glimmer of hope, but Sarah remained cautious. She still didn't trust him completely. He was an outlaw, after all, but his actions spoke louder than words. He had risked his life to save her. Perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't the monster she had imagined. But she still had so many questions and a long journey ahead of her with a man she barely knew. That night, as they camped under a sky ablaze with stars, Clay finally revealed his full plan. He built a small fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. Sarah watched him, her expression wary but also curious. "I'm not taking you to the border just to leave you there," Clay said, his voice steady. "I'm going to expose Harrow for what he is." Sarah frowned. "Ow, he's a marshal. No one will believe you, an outlaw." "I have proof," Clay replied, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a worn ledger, its pages filled with names and figures. "Harrow's been taking bribes, skimming money, and selling off confiscated goods for years. This ledger has all the details." Sarah's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "A friend," Clay said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Someone who used to work for Harrow, but couldn't stomach it anymore. He risked his life to get me this." Clay explained that he intended to reach a sympathetic newspaper editor in a town near the border. He would present the ledger as evidence, exposing Harrow's corruption to the world. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only way to ensure that Harrow paid for his crimes and that Sarah was truly safe. "But why risk so much for me?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "You don't even know me." Clay looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness that hinted at his own past. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to fight for what's right, even if it means risking everything. And sometimes, you have to help those who can't help themselves." He paused, then added, "Besides, I owe you. Harrow took something from you, just like they took something from me a long time ago. I'm just trying to even the score." His reveal changed everything. Sarah began to see him in a new light, and the seeds of trust began to sprout. Their journey to the border was a testament to the untamed spirit of the West. They rode through vast, open plains, where the only sounds were the wind whispering through the tall grass and the rhythmic beat of midnight's hooves. They navigated treacherous canyons, their walls painted with the vibrant hues of red rock and ochre earth. They crossed rushing rivers, the cold water numbing their feet. The landscape was both harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and breathtaking. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day, baking the earth and testing their endurance. At night, the temperature plummeted, and they huddled together for warmth, sharing stories and dreams under a blanket of stars. Sarah, who had always known this land, saw it with new eyes, now colored by her experience and by Clay's presence. She noticed the delicate wildflowers that bloomed in the most unlikely places, the soaring eagles that circled overhead, the resilient cacti that thrived in the arid desert. She learned to read the signs of the land, to anticipate the weather, to find water where it seemed impossible. Clay, who had roamed these lands for years, was a master of survival. He taught her how to track animals, how to build a fire in any conditions, how to defend herself against danger. He showed her the hidden beauty of the desert, the secrets that only those who truly listened could hear. As they traveled, Sarah began to appreciate the freedom of the open road, the sense of independence that came from relying on herself and on Clay. She felt a connection to the land, a sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. Despite the danger that lurked around every corner, she found a sense of peace in the vastness of the frontier. The border seemed far away, but with each passing day, they drew closer, their journey a testament to their resilience and their growing bond. Sarah's initial fear of Clay slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a growing respect and even admiration. She observed his quiet strength, his unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when it put him in danger. She saw how he treated Midnight, with a gentle kindness that revealed a softer side to the hardened outlaw. One evening, they came across a family struggling to fix a broken wagon wheel. The father was injured, and the mother was desperately trying to hold things together. Clay, without hesitation, offered his assistance. He spent hours working on the wheel, using his skills and ingenuity to get it back in working order. He refused any payment, simply saying that it was the right thing to do. Sarah watched him, her heart swelling with admiration. This wasn't the ruthless killer she had imagined. This was a man with a strong moral compass, a man who cared about others, even strangers. She saw the relief on the faces of the family, their gratitude towards Clay. Another time, they encountered a group of bandits attempting to rob a stagecoach. Clay, despite being outnumbered, stepped in to defend the passengers. He fought bravely, his skills honed by years of experience. He managed to drive off the bandits, saving the lives of everyone on board. Sarah was terrified during the encounter, but she was also amazed by Clay's courage and selflessness. He had risked his life to protect strangers, putting himself in harm's way without a second thought. She realized that Clay Maddox wasn't just an outlaw. He was a protector, a guardian angel in a lawless land. These acts of kindness and bravery chipped away at her remaining doubts, replaced by a growing sense of trust and affection. She was beginning to see the man beneath the outlaw, and she liked what she saw. The relative peace they had found was shattered one morning by the distant sound of galloping horses. Clay immediately recognized the sound. It was a posse, and they were coming fast. Harrow, despite his injury, was clearly determined to recapture Sarah and exact his revenge on Clay. Clay grabbed Sarah's hand, his face grim. "We have to go," he said, his voice urgent. Now, they mounted Midnight and raced away, the posse hot on their heels. Clay knew they couldn't outrun them on horseback. They needed to find cover, and fast. He led them towards a dense thicket of trees, hoping to lose the posse in the undergrowth. They dismounted and plunged into the trees, pushing their way through the tangled branches and thorny bushes. The posse was close behind, their shouts echoing through the woods. Clay and Sarah had to rely on each other, helping each other navigate the treacherous terrain. Sarah, who had never been much of an outdoors woman, surprised herself with her resilience and determination. She followed Clay's lead, trusting him to guide her through the wilderness. She learned to move silently, to avoid snapping twigs or disturbing the leaves. She even learned to use her senses, to listen for the sounds of the posse, to smell the smoke from their campfire. They spent the entire day hiding in the woods, constantly on the move, trying to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. As darkness fell, they found a small cave, a hidden sanctuary where they could rest and regroup. They were exhausted, their bodies bruised and scratched, but they were safe for now. The close call had forced them to rely on each other completely, strengthening their bond and solidifying their trust. Sarah realized that Clay wasn't just her rescuer. He was her protector, her guide, her only hope for survival. And she was his. They were in this together, and they would face whatever came next, side by side. Huddled in the small cave, the fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. The warmth was welcome after their harrowing escape. They ate a meager meal of dried meat and hardtack, their conversation subdued. After a while, Sarah broke the silence. "Tell me about your family," she said softly. "The one you lost." Clay hesitated, his face clouding with pain. He rarely spoke of his past, but something about Sarah's gentle eyes and genuine concern made him want to open up. He told her about his wife, Mary, a kind and loving woman with a smile that could light up a room. He told her about their small farm, their dreams of a peaceful life, and the brutal way it was all taken away. Sarah listened intently, her heart aching for his loss. She understood now why he was so driven to fight injustice, why he was so determined to protect her. He had been through so much, and yet he still had the courage to help others. Then it was Sarah's turn to share. She told Clay about her life on the homestead, about her father, about her dreams of becoming a teacher. She confessed her fears about the future, her worries about her father's safety. As they shared their stories, their vulnerabilities, a deep connection formed between them. They were two broken souls, finding solace and comfort in each other's company. The fire seemed to burn brighter, the shadows less menacing. They were no longer just rescuer and rescued. They were friends, confidants, kindred spirits. Clay saw Sarah's strength, her resilience, her unwavering spirit. Sarah saw Clay's kindness, his compassion, his hidden pain. They were both surprised by how easily they could open up to each other, how much they had in common. In that quiet moment by the campfire, their unlikely love story began to unfold, nurtured by shared experiences, mutual respect, and a growing affection. They knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous, but they also knew that they wouldn't have to face it alone. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. As they continued their journey, Sarah found herself increasingly drawn to Clay, not as the notorious outlaw she had once feared, but as the kind, compassionate man she was coming to know. She began to see beyond the rough exterior, the weathered face, the gun at his hip. She saw his inherent goodness, his unwavering commitment to justice, his genuine concern for others. She realized that the stories she had heard about him were just that, stories. They were exaggerations, distortions of the truth, fueled by fear and prejudice. Clay Maddox was not a monster. He was a man who had been wronged, a man who had chosen to fight back against the darkness, even if it meant breaking the law. She watched him as he tended to midnight, his touch gentle and reassuring. She listened to him as he spoke of the land, his voice filled with reverence and respect. She saw him as he helped others, never asking for anything in return. One day, they came across a wounded bird, its wing broken. Clay carefully splinted the wing, using his knowledge of the wilderness to create a makeshift bandage. He nursed the bird back to health, feeding it and caring for it until it was strong enough to fly again. Sarah was deeply moved by his compassion. It was a small act, but spoke volumes about his character. She realized that Clay's outlaw reputation was just a mask a shield he used to protect himself from the world. Beneath that mask was a heart of gold, a soul that yearned for peace and justice. She knew that falling for an outlaw was dangerous, foolish even. But she couldn't help herself. She was drawn to his strength, his courage, his unwavering moral compass. She was falling in love with Clay Maddox, not the outlaw, but the man. And she knew, deep down, that he was falling in love with her too. Their connection was undeniable, a force of nature that could not be ignored. Their newfound peace was once again disrupted when they spotted dust clouds on the horizon. Another posse, larger than the first. This time, they couldn't simply hide. They needed a more creative solution, one that relied on their knowledge of the land. Clay remembered a hidden canyon, a place only known to a few Native American tribes. The entrance was concealed behind a waterfall, a narrow crevice that few would ever notice. If they could reach the canyon before the posse caught up, they might have a chance. They rode hard, pushing midnight to his limits. The posse was gaining on them, their shouts growing louder. Clay knew they were running out of time. He spotted the waterfall in the distance, a shimmering curtain of water cascading down the rocks. They reached the waterfall and dismounted. Clay led Sarah behind the cascading water, the force of the water pounding against their bodies. He found a narrow crevice and squeezed through, pulling Sarah after him. They were inside the hidden canyon. The air was cool and damp, the silence broken only by the sound of the waterfall. The canyon walls were towering and narrow, providing excellent cover. Clay knew the canyon well. There were hidden trails, secret passages, and a network of caves that could provide them with shelter. The posse reached the waterfall, their horses milling about in confusion. They searched for a way through, but they couldn't find the hidden crevice. They shouted and fired their guns, but their efforts were futile. Clay and Sarah watched from the shadows, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew the posse wouldn't give up easily, but they had bought themselves some time. They used their knowledge of the land to their advantage, moving silently through the canyon, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. They had outsmarted them for now. Their escape relied on their growing bond and their intimate understanding of the terrain. They had to trust each other to survive. Safe within the hidden canyon, they allowed themselves a moment of respite. The tension of their escape began to ease, replaced by a quiet sense of camaraderie. They sat by a small pool of water, watching the moonlight filter through the canyon walls. Clay, usually so stoic and reserved, cracked a small smile. He recounted a story from his youth, a tale of a mischievous prank he had played on a pompous schoolteacher. Sarah listened, her eyes sparkling with amusement. As he told the story, Clay's voice softened, and he became almost boyish. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, her laughter echoing through the canyon. Clay joined in, his laughter deep and resonant. It was the first time they had truly laughed together, a moment of pure joy amidst the danger and uncertainty. The laughter broke down the remaining barriers between them, revealing their shared humanity. When the laughter subsided, they looked at each other, their eyes meeting in the moonlight. There was a new warmth in their gaze, a spark of undeniable attraction. Clay reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from Sarah's face. "You know," he said softly, "you're a lot tougher than you look." Sarah blushed, her heart pounding in her chest. "And you're a lot kinder than you let on," she replied. They stared at each other for a long moment, the air thick with unspoken feelings. Clay leaned in closer, his eyes searching hers. Sarah closed her eyes, waiting for his kiss. But just as their lips were about to meet, a twig snapped nearby. They both jumped apart, their senses on high alert. The moment was broken, but the spark had been ignited. They knew that their feelings for each other were real, undeniable, and growing stronger with each passing day. The danger of their situation was ever present, but so was the possibility of love. And that made all the difference. Trust was a rare commodity in the West, and Clay knew it. But he had let his guard down, lulled into a false sense of security by his growing feelings for Sarah and his desire to expose Harrow's corruption. He had made a mistake, a costly one. They had been relying on a contact, a man named Jedediah, to help them reach the newspaper editor near the border. Jedediah was an old friend of Clay's, someone he had trusted for years. He was supposed to provide them with safe passage, a place to rest, and information about Harrow's movements. But Jedediah had betrayed them. He had tipped off Harrow, revealing their location and their plans. Clay and Sarah discovered the betrayal when they overheard Jedediah talking to one of Harrow's deputies. They were shocked, their hearts filled with disbelief and anger. They confronted Jedediah, who confessed to his betrayal. He claimed he had been forced to do it, that Harrow had threatened his family. But Clay didn't believe him. He knew Jedediah had always been greedy, always looking out for himself. He had simply seen an opportunity to make some money, and he had taken it. The betrayal forced Clay and Sarah to reevaluate their plans. They could no longer trust anyone. They were on their own, hunted by lawmen and betrayed by a friend. They had to find a new way to reach the border, a way that didn't rely on anyone else's help. The betrayal also tested their relationship. Sarah was shaken by the news, questioning her own judgment. Clay, blaming himself for trusting Jedediah, became distant and withdrawn. They had to work through their doubts and fears, reaffirming their trust in each other. The experience made them stronger, more resilient, and more determined to succeed. They knew that they could only rely on each other, and that their love would be their greatest weapon. The betrayal by Jedediah dredged up painful memories for Clay, forcing him to confront his past once again. He had tried to bury it, to move on, but it always seemed to find its way back, haunting him like a ghost. Sarah noticed his increasing unease, the way he would stare into the distance, his eyes filled with a haunted look. She knew that he was struggling with something, and she wanted to help him. One night, as they camped under the stars, she gently pressed him to open up. "What's wrong, Clay?" she asked, her voice soft and caring. "You've been so quiet lately." Clay hesitated, reluctant to relive the pain. But he knew that he couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. He needed to share it with her, to let her understand why he had become the man he was. He told her the full story of his past, the story of a land baron, Silas Thorne, who had stolen his land and murdered his wife. He told her about the corrupt lawman who had turned a blind eye, protecting Thorne and leaving him for dead. He told her about his burning desire for revenge, the rage that had consumed him and turned him into an outlaw. He explained that he had spent years hunting down Thorne and his cronies, bringing them to justice in his own way. He admitted that he had broken the law, that he had crossed the line, but he insisted that he had done what was necessary, that he had fought for what was right. Sarah listened intently, her heart breaking for his suffering. She understood now why he was so distrustful, so guarded, so willing to risk everything for justice. She saw that his outlaw life wasn't a choice, but a consequence of the injustices he had suffered. She wrapped her arms around him, offering him comfort and support. She knew that she couldn't erase his past, but she could help him heal, to find peace and redemption. Together, they could build a better future, a future free from the shadows of the past. Listening to Clay's story, Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of love and compassion. She had seen his pain, his struggles, his unwavering commitment to justice. She knew that he was a good man, a man who deserved happiness and peace. She reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Clay," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I understand. I understand why you did what you did, and I don't blame you." Clay looked at her, his eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. He had expected her to judge him, to condemn him for his past. But instead, she was offering him acceptance and forgiveness. "I know you're not an outlaw by choice," Sarah continued. "I know you're a good man, Clay, a kind, brave, and honorable man. And she hesitated, her cheeks flushing red, "I love you." The words hung in the air, filling the cave with a sense of hope and possibility. Clay was stunned, overwhelmed by her declaration. He had never expected anyone to love him, not after what he had done. He had convinced himself that he was unworthy of love, that he was destined to be alone. But Sarah's words changed everything. They shattered his defenses, revealing the longing in his heart. He looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. Sarah, he said softly, Before he could finish, Sarah leaned in and kissed him, her lips soft and tender. The kiss was a declaration of her love, a promise of a better future. Clay responded with equal passion, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. In that moment, they were no longer just rescuer and rescued, outlaw and homesteader's daughter. They were two souls, bound together by love, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their love was their sanctuary, their weapon, their hope. They were close to the border now, the promise of freedom just a few days away. But they knew that Harrow wouldn't give up easily. He was too consumed by greed and revenge to let them go. As they rode through a desolate stretch of desert, they spotted him, Harrow, alone and determined, waiting for them near a rocky outcrop. He had clearly anticipated their route, cutting them off from the border. Clay pulled Midnight to a halt, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. Sarah clung to him tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was it, the final confrontation. Harrow dismounted, his face contorted with rage. "Maddox," he yelled, "I've been waiting for you. You're not going to get away with this." Clay dismounted as well, his expression grim. He knew that he couldn't talk his way out of this. He had to fight, to protect Sarah, to bring Harrow to justice. "Harrow," Clay said, his voice steady, "it's over. Just let her go, and I'll leave." "Never," Harrow spat. "She's mine, and so are you." He drew his gun and fired, the bullet whizzing past Clay's head. The showdown began. Clay and Harrow exchanged gunfire, the sound echoing through the desert. Sarah watched in terror, her heart pounding in her chest, praying that Clay would survive. Clay moved with the speed and precision of a seasoned gunslinger, dodging Harrow's bullets and returning fire with deadly accuracy. He knew that he had to end this, not just for himself, but for Sarah. He couldn't let Harrow hurt her anymore. He managed to disarm Harrow, sending his gun flying into the dust. Harrow, enraged, charged at Clay, his fists clenched. Clay sidestepped him easily, delivering a swift kick to Harrow's legs, sending him sprawling to the ground. Harrow lay there, defeated and humiliated. Clay stood over him, his gun pointed at his head. He could have killed him, ended it all right there. But he didn't. He knew that killing Harrow wouldn't bring him peace. It wouldn't erase his past or bring back his wife. Instead, he made a different choice. He holstered his gun and reached into his saddlebag, pulling out the ledger. He tossed it at Harrow's feet. "This is it, Harrow," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. "This is your end." Sarah, finally finding her courage, approached them. She picked up Harrow's gun and pointed it at him, her hand trembling, but her eyes filled with determination. "I'm taking you back to redemption," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "You're going to face justice for what you've done." They took Harrow back to redemption, where they presented the ledger to the townspeople. The evidence was overwhelming, and the townspeople were outraged. They arrested Harrow, stripping him of his marshal's badge and throwing him in jail. Justice was finally served. Harrow's corruption was exposed, and he would pay for his crimes. With Harrow brought to justice, Clay and Sarah were finally free to cross the border. They said goodbye to redemption, leaving behind the dust and the danger, the corruption and the pain. They carried with them only their love, their courage, and their hope for a better future. They rode towards the border, Midnight's hooves kicking up dust as they neared their destination. When they reached the line that separated the old life from the new, they paused, looking back at the land that had tested them so severely. Then, hand in hand, they crossed the border together, stepping into a new world, a world filled with possibilities. They left behind their old identities, shedding the weight of their pasts. Clay was no longer just an outlaw, and Sarah was no longer just a homesteader's daughter. They were Clay and Sarah, two souls bound together by love, ready to start a new life. They found a small town near the border, a place where they could build a home, start a family, and find peace. Clay used his skills to work as a ranch hand, earning an honest living. Sarah became a teacher, sharing her knowledge and her passion with the children of the town. They never forgot their past, but they refused to let it define them. They learned from their mistakes, they embraced their love, and they looked forward to a brighter future. Their love story, born in the dust and danger of the frontier, had just begun. They had found redemption in each other's arms, a love that could conquer any obstacle, a hope that could light up the darkest night. And as they looked at each other, their eyes filled with love and promise, they knew that they would face whatever came next, together, forever.